Jeffrey Tucker is a writer, publisher, entrepreneur, and advocate of anarcho-capitalism and Bitcoin. I read a few things about you, Jeffrey. He's the founder and president of the Brownstone Institute. He is senior economics columnist for the Epoch Times, author of 10 books, including Liberty or Lockdown. He's worked with Ron Paul, the Mises Institute, Lou Rockwell, the American Institute for Economic Research, and he's organized efforts against the COVID-19 restrictions. He's also the Chief Liberty Officer of Liberty.me. He is an adjunct scholar with the Mackinac, I may have said that wrong, Center for Public Policy, and a research affiliate of RMIT University's Blockchain Innovation Hub, and an Acton Institute Associate. Ladies and gentlemen, please give a large round of applause for Jeffrey Tucker.
I see left out right-wing billionaire. That's the latest moniker that's been attached to me on the internet, where they've decided that Brownstone is the center of all evil, and we're organizing, all global resistance to COVID. And it's funny how these things happen because, on one hand they're smearing me, on the other hand it's kind of awesome. Yeah. Okay, we'll see. Well, I'm sorry I wasn't allocated my usual 5 hours. But I do have some extra time, which is a delight. I do first want to thank the organizers for this event. I come here every year because, for superstitious reasons. I think it was 12 years ago when I first came to Liberty Forum, and it was a great event because I hadn't been out in the previous 20, and so I met lots of people here for the first time, and I was introduced to a new way to think about liberty, which I had not seen before. Previously, I'd only known liberty in theory, and only known theoreticians. And when I came here, I realized everybody here cares about practicing it, which I'd never encountered that before.
Did you hear me, Jason?
It changed everything. It changed my whole outlook on life. Oh, so it's not just a parlor game. It's actually something we're trying to do. Really, it just rocked my world. I was never the same after that, really. That first event changed everything for me. I'm so grateful that this is being organized every year. And it's unlike other events because it is always focused on things you can do, which really matters. I mean, maybe not everybody has exactly right one. The point is trying to do it. And wow, my friends, we discovered the difference between theoreticians and clinicians, I should say. You're all clinicians of liberty, right? We discovered over the last 3 years the difference between theoreticians and clinicians. The theorists took over the world and sidelined all the clinicians. By which, the people who actually seek to make people feel better when they get sick. Those people had almost no role at all in the COVID response. In fact, they were sidelined and censored, and they lost their jobs. So the clinicians, the practitioners, have been sidelined by the world elites in favor of their wacky visions for the future. And what is that vision for the future? So I'm sorry to report to you that while we slept, a very small gang of people hatched a plan to fundamentally change the way the world works. And they are very open about it. They talk about it all the time. And you can go to the website of the World Economic Forum and read all about it. And you might say, no, those are just a bunch of fools in, what are they, in Switzerland, something like that? What? Davos, yeah, Davos, Switzerland. And you're right, there are a bunch of fools in Davos, that's right. However, they represent a very powerful junta that had almost free reign over the entire globe, the entire planet over 3 years, and are still at it. If you think they've learned their lessons, the only lesson they take away is, shock on all works. That was round one. There'll be plenty more. The snap lockdown is a new way. What is it that they want? Well, in the old days, we used to worry about things like socialism. Part of me is like romantically attached to the old socialism, the old idea of socialism. It's like, let's have progress. Oh, that's very interesting. And let's have industry. And let's have prosperity. You know, the old socialists wanted prosperity. They're like, we can make the world function better, make everybody richer than all you other guys can. At least they had the right sort of idea in mind, which was not to wipe out a large part of humanity. That was kind of good. I mean, they ended up doing that in a lot of places anyway, but at least that wasn't their idea. These people, on the other hand, have very terrifying ideas. And I point you to, if you doubt me, an article written in Cell, the journal Cell, by Fauci and his famous co-author, who also gets a big salary at your expense because he works at NIH. I forget his name now. Anyway, the article is called something something, and it was something about infectious disease. Oh, the problem of infectious disease, and what are we going to do about it? And so the article more or less begins like this. The problem of infectious disease and the real root of the issue we're dealing with began 12,000 years ago. What? 12,000 years? You're objecting to 12,000 years of human history? I mean, geez, I used to worry about people who wanted to take us back to the 1950s or or before the Industrial Revolution, you know, or before the Reformation. No, or before Rome. No, they want to go back 12,000 years, back when we first figured out how to do what we do, which is move around, associate with people, hang out with each other, migrate, basically exercise freedom. That's what they object to. The article, middle part of the article, is all about the problem of cholera. You know what cholera is? Would you know, anybody ever had cholera? No, you haven't had cholera? Oh, well, I'll tell you, there was a time when a lot of people had cholera, and the reason they had cholera is because the water was dirty. Then they figured out how to clean up the water. So Fauci is like still going on about cholera, and his plan is to reverse 12,000 years of human history. A better idea is just to clean up the water, I would say. That's a better idea. They're not doing that, by the way. They're probably going to give us cholera again if they keep at it. The article ends by saying that in order to get rid of infectious disease, we really need a new infrastructure of human existence. This is Anthony Fauci, right? A new infrastructure of human existence whereby we don't gather in groups, we don't live in cities. If we do live in cities, we're restricted on where we can go in those cities. We don't gather in sports stadiums, and we don't migrate around. Basically, we don't have any freedoms at all. Only that, oh, and also you can't own pets. So the dogs that you own in here, no, Fauci does definitely does not approve of pets. So these people are very serious and very ferocious. So it's not quite socialism, it's not quite fascism. It's what Aaron Kheriaty calls the biomedical security state, which I think is a very good name for it. But actually, I think the vision is even more radical. What they want is what I'm calling techno-primitivism. So they want to drive us back to foraging. I mean, this is why the attacks on fossil fuels. This is why the attacks on protein, you know, and why Bill Gates is trying to invent some fake burger or something. I don't know what. This makes sense of everything. They want to reverse not just the Industrial Revolution, but agriculture too, and say nothing of fossil fuels. You know, I mean, back when what's her name AOC proposed we get rid of airline travel. I thought that was utterly nonsense. They want to do that. They want to get rid of gas cars. You think you're going to please them by getting an electric car? No. That's also fossil fuels, right? Also, by the way, there's a huge electrician shortage. I don't know if you've noticed that, but we can't get electricians anymore. They're all too busy. So they have a big agenda to make sense of everything, to reduce the standard of living, which necessarily reduces population. So those people who are vaguely suspicious that there's a depopulation agenda going on here, you know, don't dismiss it. There's something to that, right? Something to it. So much reduced population, much reduced freedom. Cities, forget it. Foraging for food, that's in. As long as it's within 15 minutes of your house, you can eat whatever you can find on the ground. But also, it's not that they want us to live like we did 12,000 years ago entirely, because the problem with 12,000 years ago, and they say this at the end of the article, we can't really go back, but we can reconstruct things. You know what the difference is? There will be a ruling class that owns all your data and will control you and track you everywhere you go. Every dime you spend, every place you visit, you're going to be a complete slave of the state. So, and look, you've known me for 13 years. I'm not exactly Mr. Conspiracy, right? I'm not the guy to go on about this or that plot. But I'm telling you, this time it is real. And we need to recognize it for what it is and fight it with all. Somebody asked me earlier, are we doomed? Kind of. The World Health Organization has every intention of institutionalizing this plan for our lives. The international health regulations right now that are being embedded in this new treaty, to which the U.S. is already more or less a signator, has this whole vision baked within it, you know, for massive control of the human population, snap lockdowns forever, track and trace over your vaccine status, control of the world by big pharma and the ruling class with censorship, so of course the media too, right? We've learned a lot over these 3 years. Remember when we used to think the only real problem was government? I thought that for years. Well, it turns out it's not just government, it's also media, it's also tech, it's also academia, it's a lot of things. It's the nonprofit world, not Brownstone, but everything else. And it's a hand-in-glove relationship in which the hand and which the glove is not always clear. So I hope you enjoy me on this investigation. We're trying our best to beat it back. We have established now a shadow World Health Organization, which is called World Health Analytical Team, or WHAT. And I'm glad to say that I got that whole project is about a quarter funded already. So I'm really fired up about that, because exposure of these people is the only way we can really beat them back, right? And we saw the way this works. Public opinion does still matter as long as people get really riled up about something. And just to refresh your memory, there were about 2 or 3 months there in earlier 2021 when several major cities in the United States were segregated by vaccines, right? So the unvaccinated weren't allowed in. All right, so what? It included, half of the members of the African-American community in New York City were excluded from restaurants, theaters, bars, libraries, and any other public space, and no one seemed to care. New York Times never denounced the new segregation. Same thing happened in Boston, happened in Philadelphia, and in Chicago, I believe, and also New Orleans, all at once. I don't know if you ever tried to visit one of those places and you had refused the magic mRNA potion, but you would have been kept away from, turned away at the door. So this is the reality. Now, how did that, I'm pretty sure all those vaccine passports came along with an intention to spread. I mean, when they were first announced in New York, I thought, this is insane. They are literally taking the greatest city in the world and destroying it and segregating it according to their new potion that nobody's tested out, and God knows what the side effects are going to be. We didn't know at the time. We knew it was going to be bad. We didn't know it was going to be this bad, but we knew it was not. I'll tell you something else about that vaccine. It wasn't just that it's not safe and effective. It's not necessary, right? I mean, that's the first thing. Necessary, okay. Is it safe and effective? So there's 3 tests, right? They didn't even bother with the first one, you know? Giving it to the masses of people who are under no threat to COVID. Well, we didn't know, did we? Yes, we did. We knew from the Diamond Princess. We knew from February of 2020. This was a conventional respiratory virus. We knew when the mainstream center-left was reporting this every day. Don't worry about COVID. Our doctors know how to handle this. And they did, except that they weren't allowed to. Because most of the good therapeutics were taken off the market, some of them, not most. Some of them were taken off the market in December 2019. So normal drugs that would treat these kinds of issues were very difficult to get. And I'm speaking, of course, of hydroxychloroquine and ivermectin, right? They were hard to get, almost impossible. I mean, in Connecticut, you couldn't get it all. And there's a massive black market in this country during this pandemic for the things that would get you better when you get sick. You couldn't get them. You had to get them through black markets. I had to order mine from Singapore, for God's sake. So it's unbelievable what this country did. And they wanted to create room only for the vaccine. I'll tell you something else. By the way, my speech hasn't started. I do have a speech in here somewhere. I have a whole plan. Haven't gotten to it yet. Why? You want to hear my darkest theory? It's not even dark. It's not even a theory anymore. The idea was to test the vaccine to prove that it could work. So that there's a pandemic, run for your life. By the way, why do we run for our lives? Probably is all a naming convention, right? We all know that COVID had been with us since at least the fall of 2019. It's spreading around at the Wuhan Olympics. Yeah, soldiers came back, but it was everywhere. They just weren't testing for it, right? Mark Twain once said, he goes, you know, we've all been born with a deadly disease from which we are definitely going to die, and everyone knows it, and nobody seems to care. But if you put a name to it, people lose their heads, right? This is what happened. He's speaking, of course, about mortality. We gave a name to COVID, SARS-CoV-2, the great coronavirus, and everybody freaked the F out. And we put up with everything. So why did they lock us down? So we got a potion that's going to cure us. mRNA. They wanted to test it out, right? They've had mRNA technology laying around for years. Fauci himself is co-owner of a patent for an AIDS drug based on mRNA technology. It's a platform technology, like a firmware of a computer. You can just write anything on it. And so they like this idea so that they can just give us continual boosters forever. But they had to deploy it sometime somewhere. This was their chance to deploy it, but they wanted to show how great it worked. In order to show that it works, are you with me on this so far? This is important, right? Yeah. In order to show that it worked, you know what you needed not to have? Well, the worst thing that could happen to you if you needed to be used as a guinea pig for this vaccine was for you to have already acquired natural immunity. You see? You can't have it. It's not allowed to get sick and get well, because if that happens, then we can't test the vaccine. How many of you thought of that before? You ever thought of that? Yeah, you thought about it? It's pretty, yeah, join me in my dark world. They wanted to preserve the immunological naivety of the whole population so that they could shoot us up, have us get well, and we'd all say, thank you, Pfizer. Thank you, government. Thank you, Operation Warp Speed, for what you did for us. We're going to need you now and forever. That was the plan. So, that was the point of lockdowns. Keep you immunologically naive, unexposed as long as possible, so that when they get the shot, they could cure you. Okay? A couple of problems with this. First part didn't work. They did horrible things to us. They created a prison state, not just in the U.S., but all over the world. Travel restrictions, domestic capacity restrictions. I held a party for more than 10. I got in big trouble for that. Where I was living, there were drones flying in the sky, and anybody with more than a handful of cars parked out front were sent. They'd snap pictures, and the drones would send them to the local newspaper, which would report them for spreading COVID. The worst thing you could ever do is get COVID. That's why we had to flatten the curve. None of it made sense, right? I mean, a respiratory virus is coming. How do we get out of a pandemic of a respiratory virus? Well, the same way we have for, let's just say 12,000 years, which is through exposure and upgrading the immune system, and it becomes endemic. The sooner you can get over that, the better off you are. So the sooner we can get back to normal, right? So you need that exposure. You need it. So I'm telling you things that apparently not even I could say in 2020, because I would probably been thrown in Guantanamo, but I'm telling you, exposure is the only way to get out of a pandemic. That's, in fact, how we got out of the pandemic. But that's why we had to flatten the curve forever, and why we couldn't go to super spreader events. I believe me, I looked for them. I tried to hold some. Couldn't get it, because I needed you immunologically naive for the shot. Ha! But then something really unfortunate happened from their point of view. The shot flopped. Didn't stop infection. Didn't stop transmission. Not even for those who didn't need it. It actually was a disaster. That's something they hadn't planned on. So they had already put the vaccine passports in place when all this stuff was coming out. So it was a disaster. Vaccine passports went away.
Everybody's now super suspicious of this mRNA technology, and so that part of their plan did not work. A lot of part of their plans did not work, but that one was certainly the major flop of all. That doesn't mean they're going to stop. They're going to keep going. Because if you read the Washington Post just yesterday, they'll tell you that the shots were the greatest thing that ever happened. They stopped the pandemic. They did not, my friends. The shots did almost nothing except, harm a lot of people, okay? I mean, maybe there's this cohort of the population that actually, it's very interesting. I was talking to a very intelligent epidemiologist who thinks that the shots did some good. And I said, well, what are the conditions under which that would be? And he said, well, let's say there's a community spread and you're 83 years old, and you have 3 comorbidities, and the pandemic is all around you, and it just so happens that you snag a shot right before you're exposed, then you could have immunity that lasts about 3 months. So I'm trying to think about the conditions under which you would know. I mean, you'd have to know, right? You'd have to know for sure that COVID was around you, and then you're like, oh, geez, I'm kind of overweight and a little bit sick, and I'm 83, and I'll get a shot, and that'll protect me for 3 months. All right. Now, it's true that at the end of the 3 months, you might die of myocarditis, but, so I don't want to say they're completely ineffective, okay? So there are rare conditions under that would work. Okay, now I would like to get, oh, God. Oh, I guess my point, let's sum up that. My point is that public resistance works, provided it's there. Who's there to provide it? You. The clinicians, the practitioners, the people who know how liberty works, believe in it, and are determined to live that way. You beat back these vaccine passports. But they were supposed to have the world locked down forever. They were supposed to win this, and they didn't. They lost. So that's how we beat them back. It's the only way. I mean, they believe they control the historical narrative. And if you ever wake up every morning and you think, wow, I have no power, I have no influence, I'm just kind of at the whims of these powerful people. They know what's what, and they're going to run the world until there's no hope for any of us. Okay, if you believe that, you're part of the problem, because that's what they want you to believe. They want you to believe that we live in a world invented by Hegel, in which they are the God, king, masters, scientists of the world, and you are nothing but their subjects and their servants. That's it. So everything you do to stop them, to prove that wrong, disables their plans. So this is all the only hope we have, right? I'm sorry, it's not DeSantis, as much as I like him, right? The hope we have in the future comes down to the things you do, which are an extension of what you believe. So, now we're getting to my actual speech. Wow. My name is Jeffrey Tucker. No. Okay, I used to be that silly guy who used to write about bourbon for breakfast and shower heads and that sort of thing. By the way, that really upsets me when I think about it. So the whole country was in a total disaster, right, through 2020. I mean, we went to PorkFest that year, and God bless you, Carla, hero of our times. You held PorkFest in 2020. God bless you, girl. Ha! And everyone here, and everyone who came. Jesus. Anyway, I remember driving to downtown, whatever that town is, Lancaster, and all the stores were boarded up. How sad was that? How heartbreaking was that? I couldn't believe it was happening to this country. So I decided to escape and go to my mother's house in Texas, Central Texas. Well, guess what? All those stores were boarded up too. Everywhere I went in the country during the whole of 2020 was nothing but a catastrophe. But our good friend President Trump got kind of tired of the whole COVID subject, because he, of course, made a catastrophic decision on March 14th or 15th, and then announced it on the 16th, which was to shut every indoor and outdoor venue where people gather, right? That's what the edict from the Trump administration said, which is, I was trying to think about, has there ever been in the history of statecraft a more extreme, really totalitarian, egregious, draconian edict than that? I don't think so. So it's very good reason to believe he regretted it. So he got tired of the subject. So as he was approaching November elections, he decided to change the subject. Guess what he wanted to talk about? Showerheads. He discovered all my old writings, or his speechwriters did. So he started railing against our poor showers and our toilets that don't function. I thought, Jesus, I've been waiting my whole life for influence over public affairs, and it has to come now, right, Carla? You understand the problem? I thought, you son of a bitch. Is this my life? Fated to influence Mr. Lockdown president to divert from the key topic, which is this country was falling apart, and he wants to talk about friggin' shower heads? Jesus. Anyway, I guess that's what they say. Mises said when coming over on the boat from Geneva after having left his home of Geneva and the whole map of Europe turning black, he said, look, I started off as a reformer and I ended up only as a historian of decline. So I sometimes feel that way. I'm only a historian of decline. Okay, let's talk about another thing that happened in early November. All right, we've been through unspeakable hell for a good part of that year. On November 7th, a scholar by the name of Thomas Fryer, it's F-R-Y-E-R. Is that the way to spell that? Is to pronounce that? Fryer, Thomas Fryer, came out with an explanation. Now, so it's a problem, right? So government imposes, puts plexiglass everywhere, makes you mask up, and they're preparing for the big jab, and they've destroyed hundreds of thousands of businesses and made it impossible for people to travel and, had basically passports between states. I mean, it was outrageous, in the Northeast especially. I don't know what it was like. Yeah. Well, you remember these days where you couldn't drive from Rhode Island to Connecticut without getting a text on your phone. You have to isolate for 2 weeks before you go back again, right? This happened in the United States, right? This really happened. Stay-at-home orders, shutting down the schools, women, everybody left the workforce. So suddenly you're having to homeschool, which used to be practically illegal, now became mandatory. This is a crazy time. So, but even the most draconian and evil totalitarian state needs a theorist to explain why it happened. So Mr. Fryer shows up on November 7th to explain it all to us. So I'd like to quickly discuss his masterpiece because it actually does deal with some serious issues. He said, well, nobody likes government, but sometimes government is necessary. We're not anarchists, after all. Did I hear somebody say, yes, we are? Yeah. Hey, we're not anarchists, after all. So what is government for? Well, government's here to correct for market failures. Okay, all right. So the word market failure is funny because it's like the presumption that if you don't believe in market failure, then you believe markets are perfect. Well, nobody believes markets are perfect, right? So my problem with market failure theory is that they always think when the market fails, first of all, the intellectual knows it. I've really begun to suspect that intellectuals don't know any more than the market knows, right? I mean, so the market may fail, but I tell you who fails even more than the market, it's the intellectuals. That's the real problem. But also, every one of these theorists that's able to discern a market failure somehow has this magic way in which government's going to come along and solve it. So they have a different standard for government, right? Well, just put me in charge of the government. I'll fix the market failure. Don't worry about it. I'm very smart. How smart are you? Well, let's take billions of people and trillions of daily transactions and actions all accumulated through institutions and thousands of years of history. I'm smarter than that. That's pretty damn smart. How are you going to control the government? Well, through my policy paper. Let's see how that's going to go. Anyway, so he lays out the 3 market failures. I would like to discuss these 3 market failures one at a time. It's very important and very interesting. The first failure, he said, is that there is such a thing as infectious disease. What are you going to do? So he says in his little introductory part, he quotes this line from, I don't know, it's that my right to swing my fists ends at the tip of your nose, something like that. So he's basically invoking what sometimes people call the non-aggression principle, right? But he's describing viruses as aggressors, right? So you get it, right? By the way, Fauci picked up on this. in several interviews, because of course we have to have NPIs, non-pharmaceutical interventions, these sensible public health measures and mitigation strategies, because otherwise people are going to be aggressing on each other by getting each other sick. Okay, so I guess, what we have lacked in the history of liberalism might have been a consistent theory of how freedom interacts with the presence of infectious disease. What do you do in the presence of infectious disease? What do you do? Well, what I would say is what you do is you have freedom, okay? And the reason I say that is that we've always had infectious disease and always will have infectious disease. And we are surrounded by pathogens, and trillions of them, and they're inside our bodies, and they save our lives, and they also vex us. We dance with them every single day, and we have evolved with immune systems to deal with them. We don't need the state coming along saying, arresting you for sneezing, okay? Who wants to do that? Oh, nobody wants to do that. Yeah, somebody wants to do that. My old friend Walter Block just wrote an article the other day saying that he wants people to. Anyway, I love Walter, so I'm not going to criticize him. There's a reason I didn't share his article. I wanted to spare him the humiliation. It was an attack on me, by the way. But anyway, our friend Thomas Fryer says that anytime there's infectious disease, government needs to keep us separated. Well, what does it mean to keep people separated? Yes, it means everything that happened. Travel restrictions and domestic capacity restrictions. And then along with that comes masks, which he was sure in November of 2020 stopped the pathogens. And so that if you're not wearing a mask, at very best you're woefully impolite, you might be aggressing on your neighbor, and that probably you're a criminal, okay? This was his theory. So we had mask mandates. Remember those? Yeah. Couldn't go anywhere without a mask. Of course, we know now, what we knew then, which is that they're useless. And if anybody bothered, instead of writing policy papers or getting on Twitter to read a book on the topic, they would have known that. I highly recommend, for example, anybody who's confused on this topic, to go to Amazon and search for Cell Biology for Beginners. It's a good book. Could have prevented a lot of intellectual error. So, if your theory is that in the presence of infectious disease you cannot have freedom, I'll tell you this. You don't believe in freedom at all. It's just true. What do you do in the case of a pandemic? You go about life normally. You try to find a means to get people better. And you don't disrupt fundamental social functioning. You don't do it. It's never been done before. I mean, we've tried that a little bit. In 1918, there were two cities that briefly locked down and imposed mask mandates, so San Francisco and Chicago. We learned from that experience that it was a disaster. It did nothing to stop the pathogen, nothing at all, and just did a lot to disrupt normal course of life, which drives people to panic and also ruins public health. It's actually one of the most extraordinary things. You think about the government did everything over 3 years in the name of public health. Public health in this country has never been in shabbier shape than it is right now. Unbelievable. Anyway, let's return back slightly to this problem of infectious disease. I think there's a lot of people who don't understand it. Infectious disease has never been a less of a problem for humanity than it is right now. Never been less of a problem than it is for humanity right now. The big problem we have right now is chronic disease. We're destroying ourselves with bad food, bad drugs, no exercise, so on and so on. That is the problem, right? So it's heart disease, it's obesity, it's all those things. Chronic disease is the problem. It's not infectious disease. By the way, I have a friend of mine who worked for the World Health Organization. He has a whole theory of this. He says, I have a theory that we're afraid of the thing that's not a problem, but we ignore the thing that is the problem. He said he worked in sub-Saharan Africa for years where it seemed like every fifth person was dying of malaria and nobody cared. And I was like, he thought when he got there, everybody would be running around terrified of malaria. No, nobody cared. He was like, have you had malaria? Oh, yeah, I had that once, yeah. People just going about the business. We ignore the real danger all around us while being freaking out about the things that's actually not a problem. So here's the question. Why is infectious disease not really that big of a deal to us anymore? It's because we evolved with immune systems to improve. Three great things happened in the late 19th century to dramatically reduce the problem of infectious disease. One was improve sanitation. Second was improve personal hygiene. Well, just keep going through the list. Another was transportation services and capitalism generally that gave us the ability to get fresh food so we wouldn't have to eat rancid meat and rotten vegetables, right? So we just got better. We got better food, and crucially, we got the horses out of the cities. That was a huge problem, right? Because the horses were always horses are do bad things to cities. They do bad things to cities, and one of the major problems with horses is that they always had hooves with nails, and they would drop these nails all over the city into horse manure, and so you would step on them and get a disease called tetanus, and which some people pronounce tetanus, I think wrongly. It's not the way it's spelled. It's Latin. That's what reduced infectious disease. Then when we came up with antibiotics, that was the magic, right? I mean, 3/4 of the people died in the 1918 pandemic, flu pandemic, H1N1, died from secondary infections. That's what killed them, right? And those are now solvable with antibiotics, if you can get them. Which I was just in Mexico. You can buy in almost anything in any pharmacy, by the way. Ivermectin, oh, sure. I'll take 1,000 pills, no problem. Doxycycline, here you go. Not in this country. Not in this country. Anyway, well, let me just mention a final factor. It actually may be the most crucial factor. The reason we've conquered infectious disease is that we've been exposed to each other more than ever. All right? So World War I, ghastly, terrible. The silver lining was massive exposure for the whole world to everyone else's diseases in the world, right? We massively upgraded our immune systems as a result of World War I. Also, we had international travel, boats, fancy people traveling on boats, being exposed to weird people all over the world. Now, this is a very important stage in the history of humanity because it was really the first time when we had global exposure to everybody else's pathogens. And we've all adopted these things. And so immunological naivety virtually disappeared during the course of the 21st century so that every existing disease became endemic, which is to say manageable through medical care, right? This is huge. You look at the charts. Why did humanity just go from living this long, this long, and this long, and then suddenly there's this huge uptake from 1880 all the way through 1920 in population, in living standards, in health overall, and longevity is and people say, well, it's because we got better doctors. That's not why we got better. It's not because of the better doctors, okay? They were killing people then just as they kill us now. It's because of exposure. Exposure of the human population is the greatest gift we could have ever had. Exposing to each other, which is to say freedom. Freedom of association, crowds, cities, travel, capitalism, right? Progress. That's what made us healthy. You see what I mean? You understand how little this is understood, covered in the literature? It's not. This is the magic. It's association and freedom that makes us healthy. We need exposure. It's not just, as the economists say, a negative externality to be seized on. It can be a positive externality. It can be the best thing that ever happened to you. 2 generations ago, we understood this. Parents sought to expose their children to things so that they would live healthy lives. You see what I mean? Okay, so the people who are celebrating human separation in the name of stopping pathogenic spread had it exactly the opposite, right? We needed not to flatten the curve, but to steepen it as soon as possible so we could go from pandemicity to endemicity quickly. Rather than wrecking our lives as we did, it could have been over within months, if not weeks. Okay? 2 weeks. Yeah, 2 weeks to steepen the curve. That's a Jeffrey Tucker plan for dealing with the pandemic, right? All right. I don't know if I want to belabor this point. It's actually really important, but you see my point. Your neighbor is not your enemy. Infectious disease isn't even your enemy. I mean, it's a dance. It can be dangerous, but it can also be very good. In fact, essential. when the Spanish settlers, well, I'll use a different term, colonizers, okay, aggressors, first came to Mexico, a priest by the name of De las Casas, who, God bless his memory, wrote vicious things about the colonizers because they said, because of all the terrible things they were doing in Mexico. But what he observed was that every time the Spanish soldiers would arrive into a peaceful, happy Indian, I should say native city of Aztecs or Mayans or whatever they were, the Spanish soldiers would arrive, and then a couple months later, half the residents would be dead. How did that happen? I mean, De las Casas didn't know about infectious disease. He just assumed the Spaniards were killing everybody and wrote about it, right? You should read his books, actually. They're really interesting, harrowing, fascinating. Well, the Spaniards weren't killing people deliberately. It was the pathogen that was killing people. It was a terrible, terrible disease called smallpox, which is wicked. It might have wiped out half to 2/3 of the native population of this side of the world. That's how bad it was, all right? So you complain about your life now. It was bad, really bad back then. Anyway, the only force in this universe that's more dangerous than government is a naive immune system, my friends. That has killed far more people than all the governments in all the world combined. It's wicked. To be immunologically naive is to be on the verge of death. You don't want it. So, social distancing is evil. It's a death sentence. Human separation is not the way to health. It's the way to an early death. And maybe that's what they want of us anyway. So I just hope I could stop there. That's a very hard lesson. All right? It's a hard lesson for all of us because we've almost forgotten this point. For generations, parents taught their children. For generations, people paid attention in 9th grade biology even and learned it. No more. People have forgotten this very, very important point. I'm telling you, it's extremely important. Brownstone has a book coming out on this very subject. It's called Fear of a Microbial Planet. It's really good. It's about 2 months away. All right, let's go on to the second point. And I really am going to try to open it up. I'm going to try to march from the next 2 points. The second market failure he believed was in medical research. He wanted the government to fund medical research because, and he's got a point here, right? He's like, he's got a point here that the reason for the NIH is to fund random controlled trials on drugs that are there's no real economic incentive to do so on the part of private industry because there's no real benefit to it. So look, I'm willing to grant that that's a problem, and that is why NIH existed. But guess what? They didn't do any random controlled trials on any of the repurposed generics. No, they only funded these fraudulent trials of mRNA vaccines. And just mRNA, right? I mean, J&J came out with a conventional vaccine and it was immediately taken off the market. Wow, that's giving people blood clots. Can't have that. Oh, right. Okay, so you can't trust government to fix that. So, Mr. Fryer. The third one concerns immunity itself. And guess what he was doing first week of November? He was laying the groundwork for vaccine passports, right? He's like, okay, immunity is a collective problem. It's not just about yourself, right? Because there is a thing called herd immunity theory. And it's not a theory, it's a reality, right? So the idea is that if Mr. Pathogen hops into this room and infects a nice friend in the corner, and she infects the guy next to him, and she also infects the guy across from him. Okay, so now we've got a problem because we've got a R0 of 2. Right? One person infects 2 people and so on it goes. But at some point, the pathogen's hopping through this, and enough people are immune, the pathogen can't find a new host. So the pathogen's sitting over there with Carla going, hey, Carla, where should I go? And Carla says, well, I think there might be a naive, immunologically naive person on the front row. And the pathogen's like, I don't know, can't even find my way there. So at that point, the pathogen still exists, but it can't find any more hosts. That's called herd immunity. Have you ever heard it explained like that? It's a pretty good explanation. So we all want herd immunity. You've never heard that before. It's pretty good, right? But so we want herd immunity, and this guy says we all know that it's 70 or 80%. So we've got to get 70, 80% of the population immune before any of us are really safe. Okay? And let's say that's right. We don't know if that's right. It all depends on which one it is. Sometimes it's 90%. Sometimes it's 30%. I mean, SARS-CoV-1 burned itself out because we couldn't find any more hosts, right? And why could not find any more hosts? Because it tended to kill people. If the pathogen is really severe, it's not going to be prevalent. I don't care if it's made up in a lab or not. Severity and prevalence exist as a trade-off, one to each other, subject to latency, which is another subject we'll leave for another time. Okay, so he was laying the groundwork for the vaccine passports, which came along in time, and millions of people were displaced from their jobs, fired, terminated, moved, whatever. And I have friends who are texting me in Brazil right now that they're mandating vaccines, and there's people scrambling to get out. For God's sake, what have we done to the world? Curses on everybody who assisted in building this evil system. Okay, now, a final point on this. That article was published by the Cato Institute. So, there are lots of things to say about that. All right, I'm going to open it up for questions, but let me just say this. I'm not going to ask for a show of hands because I think it'd be everybody, almost everybody's lives have been massively disrupted over 3 years. We've lost friends and family, we've lost jobs, we've moved. Our worldviews have changed, our understanding of the way the world is working has changed. We're disoriented, we're demoralized, we're fat. No. Actually, everybody put on 20 pounds. Or sometimes they call it the COVID-19. It's been tough times for everybody, right? Look, I went through very dark times. I'm sure you all have your own stories. I'm glad to be here. I'm glad to be with you. I would like you to join me in a personal campaign for hope. For hope, right? Because without that, we're not going to fight. And without the fight, we're not going to win. But my friends, this is the test. Now, maybe you were confused during COVID. I don't care. That was then, this is now. They tested us. Some of us passed, some of us failed. All of us have been reduced. Our standards of living are going down. Our freedoms are slipping away. They've only just begun, okay? You're in this room for a reason. You've been touched. You've been tasked with the job, which is to fight and resist all the way to the end. All right, thank you very much. Yeah, and I've got a few minutes here. Yeah, let's 10 minutes. So let's make it questions, not speeches. Okay, go ahead.
Thank you, Jeffrey. You said that all these businesses in Texas and elsewhere were shuttered.
Yeah.
And why is it that businesses all over, including here in New Hampshire, seem to have a trouble finding people, and somehow the IRS thinks they're going to find 87,000 new employees? If all these businesses are gone, how come we don't have an easier time finding employees instead of a harder time? I own a landscaping business.
I understand, my friend. I'll just give a brief answer. Back in 2008, our friend Ben Bernanke reduced interest rates to 0. What that did was sent capital on a frantic hunt out of consumption goods, hospitality, and things that are like real, like landscaping businesses and restaurants and everything else, and shoved it over to the high-end capital speculative end of the yield curve, the right side of the yield curve. So all the money went to freaking Facebook or Twitter and all this other bullshit, right? So that's why they got millions and millions and millions of labor resources over there. People graduated college, they got a degree in bullshit, and then they got a 6-figure salary for Zooming during the pandemic, right? So fuck all those people. Now they're all being fired. So we're seeing a dramatic shift from the right side of the yield curve back now that the Federal Reserve has shifted interest rates policies, which are now having to chase inflation, that the final rates have to be closer to 6% or even 7%, even to outrun the current rate of inflation. And that's shoving capital back on the other direction. So we're still in a situation where we have a massive labor surplus on the right side of the yield curve with tech companies and media companies, all these other losers, and they're all getting fired. Elon sets the goal, which is 3 out of 4 employees in that sector are going to die, which is great. Euthanasia, I mean, not really die, but you know. And they're going to have to find jobs as working for you. So that's the plan.
So the problem of not being able to find employees
Yeah.
today
Yeah.
started back in roughly 08.
That's right. And now we have to go through a huge shift. Then Joseph Schumpeter said in 1945, there's no more any more disruptive society than people downgrading their social status. But that's what's going to happen to millions of people.
Thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you. Yeah, no, so don't feel sorry for any of the people fired by Twitter. Tell them to learn to bartend.
So you mentioned how this was your dark things, and so my most cynical self, and I'd like to hear you tell me if it's absolutely too cynical, and I'll never admit that I said this out loud, but what, one of the things I kept asking is, you know, why are they mandating and pushing these vaccines on people that have like a 1 in 3 million risk of dying, if that? And so I guess in my most cynical self, I say, well, that way there's no comparison group. You know, no one to compare.
Oh, they're
so
eliminating the control group. Yeah,
right,
eliminating
so
the
you'll
control.
never
That's surely got to be part of it, right? And also, they just when you come out with a product that hardly anybody wants or needs, you're going to have to find any means to find customers for it. So.
Are you a physician?
No, I'm not. No.
Well, I am.
Oh, good.
And
how did I do?
You did absolutely amazing, and that's really all I have to say. So, and just to give you a little bit of background so that you can put it in context, I'm a family practice physician. I'm in Rhode Island. I have my own practice, so it's just me. Good. And I'm an MD, the real thing. Well, that's maybe the plan, but you took me on this journey in this talk that was really emotional for me because I was on the front lines, and I was one of the. I mean, I'm a physician who actually gives a shit about people, you know, and the amount of human suffering that I saw in isolation. I was in isolation all by myself as a physician with nobody to help me. They isolated me from all my colleagues. It was horrible, but you're absolutely right. That is what the human's immune system was designed to do. And I'm so proud of some of the work that I did without even knowing it, you know? And I'm not like an anti-vaxxer, but I'm sure as hell glad I didn't get my kid vaccinated. And when patients would ask me, oh, doctor, should I get the shot? I would always say the same thing, which is, I'm supposed to tell you it's your decision. And then I would do this. So, yeah, I just wanted to thank you very much. I think you were spot on, and you really brought a lot of things to light. That was the truth. That thread was the truth the whole time. And I freaking knew it, and hallelujah. So
thank you. Wow, what a wonderful thing to hear. That's just really great. You know, if you come to PorcFest this next year, Brownstone has a tent, and I'm bringing in lots of MDs to talk here, right? It's going to be interesting for PorcFest, right? Or you want to go see the doctor? Come to the Brownstone tent. So I would love for you to come and give a talk. Yeah, it would just be great, and we'll put you on schedule and just tell your whole story. I mean, it's very inspiring. Everybody cares about this stuff, right? I mean, who knew that public health was so integral to the practice of freedom, you know, and medical knowledge was so important to human freedom. So we've got the Frontline COVID Care Alliance doctors presumably coming. So they're great guys, ferocious. Yeah, go ahead.
One little anecdote, you were talking about how quickly this could have been over. I was talking with a friend of mine from China and how very recently, a couple months ago, they opened up and like everybody got COVID. And she told me 2 weeks ago, like COVID's done in China. Right. Like everyone's got it. They're over it. Yeah. So like billion people, you had the experiment was run. And from granted, I only have one piece of data, but it seems like everyone she knew, literally everybody she knew got it.
Yeah.
and they're all over it.
Yeah, no, you're exactly right. And the China experiment is very interesting because we shouldn't even have any debates about the severity or prevalence of COVID anymore after China, because they locked everybody down and delayed the infections. I mean, we don't actually know. The data's so bad. But once they opened up, you're right, everybody got COVID and they upgraded the immune system. That's it. Again, by the way, this is an ongoing process. It's not like, oh, no, new pathogen. No, this is always, viruses are always mutating. We're always living among mutating viruses. They change all the time.
So I have a question. There's still a scary percentage of people who agree with, you know, what happened and the policies. And I just talked to somebody this week who said, yeah, I'm going to have an outdoor picnic, but I want everyone to bring their vaccination card with them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I only have 2 words to say to that. But
how, like, the next, I mean, the next thing that happens, the next whatever variant, the next disease, the next, you know, bogeyman, like, there's a huge percentage of the population that's going to go right along and want to do this again. Like, what's your over and under on, like, if they're going to be able to do this again to us?
Yeah, well, the over and under, the estimate is like, can they get away with it? And my guess is they're going to change the story just enough so that it seems like it's brand new again, but it'll be repeated the same, you know. I don't know what that change is going to be like. Look, they don't know either. They're throwing darts right now. I mean, the New York Times came out with a big article the other day that said half of humanity can die from the avian bird flu, right? H5N1. And that's because 2 people have it and 1 died. So that's a 50% death rate. I don't want to hear any laughter. Okay.
So great talk and acknowledging the medical tyrannies I think we've all witnessed. I'm curious as to your thoughts on the best practical steps forward. What can we do? Practical, tangible things to kind of move us forward from this and find more liberty.
Gosh, one, maybe this is the answer you need. Sometimes you have to move. You know, it's funny because I think often my whole imagination is animated by what it must have been like in 1934 Vienna when you're suddenly seeing, you know, the Nazis marching in the streets. I'm like, what do you do? Sometimes you have to pick up and move, and I always thought that would be the most difficult decision. It shouldn't be a difficult decision anymore. Get the hell out of wherever the place is that you know is going to be quarantine you. Sorry, but that's the most important obligation you have is protect yourself. And then after that, educate your fellows and encourage the resistance. Yeah.
You said you got your therapeutics from Singapore. I was curious, did you actually have to use them? You don't have to talk about your personal thing, but I was curious if you did. And also, with our doctor, did you prescribe the similar therapeutics to your patients?
There was a protocol that, imagine this, right? The NIH and CDC sucked massively. It took independent doctors, you know, all of our friends, Zelenko and, you know, and so on, and Corey and so on, to come up with the protocol. It wasn't that hard because doctors like you have been dealing with infectious disease, respiratory diseases like this your whole career. So we knew it's a combination on one thing. There's not hydroxychloroquine or ivermectin. Both are very useful and very important, but so is sunshine, and so is vitamin D, and so is doxycycline and other antibiotics for preventing that dreadful secondary infections. And doctors know. I mean, you can tell from a phone call. You're like, well, doctor, this is why I'm feeling, you've got COVID and you might be having a secondary infection, and you can make the right prescription just on the phone. So in my case, I bought, oh God, I can't believe the things that this New Hampshire draws out of me. I'm always saying outrageous things to the microphone. But I ordered like 1,000 ivermectins from Singapore and gave them out to all my friends. And, you know, just public service, you know. Okay, so thank you all so much. All the best.